Good afternoon, Jake. It's Friday, March 4th, 2011. Note to self, invent more interesting ways to appear on camera. To respond to your video, Jake, I absolutely agree. No one should see the censored version of the King's Speech. No one. Not ever. Ever. Paramount Pictures is using censorship to make the King's Speech marketable, and at the same time is destroying and stifling Tom Hooper's creativity, as is the director of the film. I think that anyone who saw the movie will agree that the profanity that was in the movie was necessary to the progression of the plot of the film. In fact, I think any child with sensible parenting could see this movie without it influencing them negatively. Moving on, Jake, do you like parables? The reason I ask is we just finished our academic survey of the Bible in my Humanities Surveys course. And despite readings from all 4 of the Gospels, we didn't go over any parables at all. And since I was deprived of such an iconic part of Christian ministry, I thought I'd tell you one myself. Shazam. There was once a band of 11 boys together on a camping trip in the woods. They had just finished fishing when evening approached and they decided to build a fire. After they all got comfortable in their spots and had a few minutes of debate, they decided on a game. Rather than campfire songs or ghost stories, they elected to have a competition with the game of I Am. And though they knew it to be childish, they looked around for inspiration to practice with. One saw a horned silhouette in the bushes and said, "I am the stag." And another boy heard a howl on the wind and said, "I am the wolf that eats the stag." And the third boy who was cleaning his rifle said, "I am the man who hunts the wolf." And they all laughed. Content with the rules of the game, they fancied a gamble. They all waged their day's catch of fish, each sure of their victory. But then they all sat in silent apprehension, each afraid to waste their turn on the starting point, because the starting point never won. But the youngest boy, a small, gangly fellow with a red cap, sat up and looked out over the water, and he knew the answer. And so he leaned forward with a triumphant smile on his face and whispered, "I am the water." And they all laughed hysterically at his attempt. "How quiet," one said. "How insignificant," said another. And the third said, "How small." But the boy repeated with the same smile, "I am the water." But they all laughed, and the second boy said, "I am the deep dark well that draws that water." But the boy was still smiling as the third boy said, "I am the sweet crisp rain that fills that well." He still looked amused as the fourth boy said, "I am the placid pond that holds that rain." And the fifth said, "I am the long and winding river that feeds that lake." And the fifth said, "I am the wide and reaching sea that swallows that river." And the seventh said, "I am the terrible tempest storm that churns that sea." And the eighth said, "I am the swift and twisting current that muffles that storm." And the boy smiled on as the ninth boy said, "I am the calm and steady tide that governs that current." And when the 10th boy said, "I am the moon that masters that tide." And then the 11th boy, the oldest, burst out triumphantly and said, "I am the earth that mothers that moon." And the last boy, seeing that everyone had used their turn, knew that he had won. But the small boy in the red cap kept smiling. He said, "I am the water that gives life to that earth. I am the great and terrible sum of all things. I am the cradle of life and the life itself, for I am the water." The boys looked around at each other, stunned, confused, defeated. Not one of them could think of anything greater, wider, or more terrible than the eternal promise of life. The boys stacked their fish in a pile before the victor, and were silent. And the red-cap boy ate well that night, and slept with a sound reservation of a worldly understanding. And then the next morning, the other 10 picked him up in his knapsack while he was still sleeping and threw him in the lake. And they said, "We've had it up to here with your existential BS, you nerd. For the last 3 days, you have not shut up about Nietzsche and your freaking determinism versus free will. No one cares."
I have a scholarship from the NYU Philosophy Department, one of the foremost institutions for higher thinking in the world.
Maybe if you spent less time studying metaphysics, you could have found a job so you could pay for your share of the gas. But no, Derek had to use his mom's debit card because you can't pull your own weight. You know what? Bet the water's cold. Why don't you contemplate that for a little while, you tool? And as I'm sure you're aware, Jake, that man was Henry David Thoreau. Not really. You see, Jake, I have this thing with parables. You see, what I have a problem with are the ambiguous, undocumented, and dramatic chain letters that I get in my email. But with factual parables, we're able to judge ourselves by the same standards as the characters because they are real. See, when a parable is based on factual evidence, it can show us something greater about the world that we actually live in. You see, Jake, parables worked for Jesus and the Buddha because they were trying to explain incredibly sophisticated philosophical issues to people who couldn't firmly grasp them, colloquial people. But we live in a society with a more sophisticated understanding of the world. You see, a fictional parable makes you the god of the parallel universe where your parable exists. And even if you can allow some tangent experience and reward from that experience to somehow affect the characters in your parable, it doesn't draw any sort of relevant connection to the world in which we live. Because with factual parables, we're able to correlate the actions and the morals that were put behind the actions to the actual real-life results of those actions. You see, the only good parables aren't parables at all, they're stories. I know a parable is a story, but in order to deal with the sophisticated society we live in, we have to tell our stories in a way in which the moral is presented in a more elegant way. And in this way, all stories are parables, but they have to be told in a specific way depending on who and what you're talking to. Which is why I don't think it's too crazy to equate great prophets with great writers. And so, Jake, I say to you that parables are only for prophets and great men, and I am neither. But for the sake of argument, let's keep the parables in church and out of my mailbox. Jake, I'll see you tomorrow.